My name is Gorman, and in this episode of Semilla.VC, I sit down with Sebastian Cardenas, Senior Associate at Monashees, Mexico City. Prior to his current role, Sebastian spent 4 years at Goldman Sachs in New York as both an associate and an analyst in Equities Sales Trading. In this episode of Semilla.VC, we discuss differences in working at a bank in New York versus as a VC in Mexico City, Monashees' presence in Mexico City and Spanish-speaking Latin America, and how Monashees sources and analyzes deal flow. We discuss all this and more in this episode of Semilla.VC.
Cool.
Okay, Sebastian, could you start by telling the audience a bit more about your work history up to and including your current role at Monashees?
Yeah, for sure. Hello, Trip. Thank you for having me here. Really quickly, I'll go a little bit back. I was born in Medellin, Colombia, and then I moved to the US after high school. I did undergrad at Stanford, and then I started working at Goldman in sales and trading. It was called the Global Markets Division, and I worked there for 4 years, mostly covering institutional clients. And it was really interesting because I got to see a full cycle. I started in 2018 when the Fed was finishing their hiking cycle, all the way through the COVID crash. And extremely easy monetary policy, and left mid 2022 when a lot of the tightening that we saw last year was already like massively priced into the market. So it was interesting to see, and I think also doing it at Goldman was interesting, given the capital markets calendar they have there. So the SPACs, the IPOs, the follow-ons, and also very important block trades there. And it was a really fun job. I think trading is very dynamic. It's very analytical. The hours are not as intense as investment banking, even though you do have to get there early. When I started at 6 a.m., which can be a little bit rough, especially in the winter in New York. But yeah, I think 4 years in, I was a little bit tired of New York. It's a great place to live, but I had been there, done that. And I was also really interested in what was happening in the Latin American VC ecosystem. I have a lot of friends from home that are also very entrepreneurial, that really like to keep up with what's happening in the tech scene. So in the pandemic, we started setting up calls with different entrepreneurs, mostly in Colombia, with the Bilbaos, with other Rappi people. And it was just so cool to be able to feel that culture, see kind of the passion these people had to build in Latin America and transform the region. So based on that, I was like, I think the next thing I should do is venture capital.
So my buddy that works at Wells Fargo Sales and Trading, he says he gets in at 6:30, and you said you get in at 6. So I guess that's why you guys win everything.
I mean, when I started, it was 6. Later, I think after I had spent a couple of years there, and I paid my dues, I was able to get in a little bit later.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So could you tell the audience a bit more about the history of Monashees and what sets you apart and why you work there and everything about that?
Yeah. So I think just to tie kind of the part of the work history into Monashees, right? I think I started recruiting for VCs in the US with a LATAM angle to do LATAM. And then I got a call from Monashees, actually through a friend in common. They were opening their Mexico office, and I was like, okay, this is my golden ticket to LATAM. And I think I'll share a bit about your question about Monashees. I think I'd like to add that I've been only here for just under 11 months. So a lot of it, I was very lucky to be able to jump into the ship. That's already going pretty well. But the story of Monashees, best told by Eric and Fabio, the co-founders, is that they started in 2005, and they had big conviction in the region, that it was a region of fertile ground for venture capital. So they're pretty much the pioneer venture capital in the region, like Silicon Valley style. And they even say that they might have started a little bit too early, because for the first 5 years, nothing really happened. They tried to incubate everything, and there was just not a lot going on. And in 2010, it really started to happen. But it was also important for them to be there from the start, because and they knew it was going to take time. They knew, like, hey, look, this is going to be a bet that's going to pay off. It might take a little bit of time, but we have high conviction that it's going to happen. And I think it was a Brazilian venture capital fund for the first 10 years. And let's call it that experiment that went really well. A lot of really interesting investments, A lot of the first investments by the major US VC funds in the region were alongside us in our portfolio companies. So we became an important partner for them and built really important relationships from the start. 2016 was really cool for Monashees because it was the first investment, the first like large investment outside of Brazil, which was the seed round of Rappi in Colombia. And after that, of course, a lot of investments in Colombia and the rest of Spanish-speaking Latam. And I think that the other major step for Monashees was opening their first office outside of Sao Paulo, which we opened last year and which I was hired for. The office is led by Fabiola Quinzaños, a principal here. She's awesome. And me and the investment team, and we have another person in community. But yeah, we're really excited to also have an office in Spanish-speaking Latam and really be able to cover the region more holistically.
Very exciting. Thank you for that whole background. So I want to ask, what does it mean to be a senior associate at Monashees? What does that role entail, and how do you spend your time?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to other VC funds, right? I think we are a relatively flat organization, I would say. Everyone's always kind of growing and filling in wherever it's most useful. I think we have a very good deal flow engine built, I would say. And I didn't build it, but we're very lucky to have that through our network of entrepreneurs. And yeah, our broad network that we're able to get a good deal flow, but we're relentless about being able to never miss a deal. So we never take that for granted. I think everyone wakes up every morning just fearful of missing a deal, or not knowing something that something's happening. And I think that happens across the organization, but it's also a big part of my role, especially in Mexico. I think as a senior associate, you also have an important role in the deal making. Really making sure that everything is done correctly, that we're doing the thorough analysis, that we're getting all the correct work done to make it happen. And it's also cool because it's also a role where I also get to participate in LP meetings, talk to LPs, as more of us as junior member, and also in some investment committees, especially in the deals we're bringing. So I get to see a lot of what's going on in the organization. Sometimes as a more senior person in a particular task, and sometimes as a more junior person in a particular task.
And so you mentioned your time in New York, and then now your time in Mexico City. Moving from Goldman Sachs in New York to venture capital Mexico City must have been quite the shift. Can you talk about some of the differences you noticed during this transition, like culturally, work-wise? You're probably not waking up at 5 a.m. anymore. And how did your previous experience play into your current role in VC?
Yeah. So I think the big thing that's very similar between both roles is that they're both very heavily relationship-driven roles. And I think that's really interesting, right? Like at the end of the day, I would say relationship-driven and analytical. So I think from that perspective, there's a lot of soft skills that play into both, and obviously both are finance roles. So you have to be familiar with the terms of the general finance world. I think what was interesting at Goldman is that, especially during COVID, we did so many things in tech IPOs and SPACs. Covering growth investors is something I did specifically. I cannot mention which one specifically in a public interview, but a lot of like the top growth funds in the world, I had the chance of covering and speaking with. So I think through those interactions, I also got a big sense of what was going on in the growth VC landscape. But it was a massive difference, like being able to come to Mexico. It's a very different lifestyle. Like it's always warm and sunny here, and I love it. I think being able to feel the people in Latin America, the energy of Latin America, something that's always been very special to me. Something that I've always been very mission aligned with. So I think for me, I just wake up every day here with a way larger sense of purpose than I probably did at Goldman, even though I love that job. It was a really cool job. And I think the final thing I'll add is that, I think I'm way more impressed by the people in my team here at Monashees than probably a lot of people I worked with at Goldman Sachs, which might sound a little bit shocking to many people, but it's really cool to be able to come to Latin America and see the quality of the people that are in the ecosystem here. So yeah, I think that was really surprising. Like really being able to see like, wow, I'm really impressed by a lot of folks that I'm interacting with on a day-to-day here in Latin America.
I like that. And Semilla.VC only hit 100 subscribers just now. So nobody in New York will ever see this. So you don't have to worry that any of your Goldman peers will ever see it.
No, by the way, there's a lot of smart people in Goldman.
I'm just kidding.
I would just say like the average person and some of the people I look up the most to, holistically speaking, are people in Latin America, people I work with today.
I really like it. And so one of the components of the one of the groups you're working with are the founders. So can you speak a little bit more about your approach to working with founders and how you and Monashees support them beyond just giving capital?
Yeah, for sure. So I think something that's really interesting is the interesting of how VC scales, of how VC firms scale. So we're very lucky to be able to have an organization of 33 people today, which not only includes the investment team, but we also have a network services team, which includes recruiting, people, which is essentially like we have a fractional CHRO for companies, so they can decide how to create like organizational charts. And her name is Aline Esteves. She worked in Quinto Andar for a while and like extremely experienced, super senior person. Also talks about culture, so we provide a lot of help from that perspective. We also have an operating officer who's Guto Araujo, who was actually a portfolio founder before, which was a company called Eloseci, which was the Etsy of Brazil that actually sold to Etsy. And after it sold to Etsy, he came to work at Monashees, and he's a product and tech genius. So companies also have him as a resource. I think one thing that's really cool about Monashees is that we never force people to meet with Guto or with Aline. It's more, hey, look, here are the resources if you want them, but if your style is a little bit more independent, we'll also give you the ability to do that. We also have a very large, or not very large, but very robust community team, creating events, connecting founders, setting up like speaker series on particular topics that are very relevant for today's ecosystem. And I think what's most interesting is the experience of the partnership and the investment team, right? Like Eric has been doing this for 18 years. This year is going to be 18 years. So we call it this year, Monashees is going to be an adult, so to speak. And that's what Eric mentions. Carlo has been there from the start. Marcelo and Caio have been there for 10 years and 14 years respectively, maybe even a little bit more. And I think what's interesting is that like VC is really a game where even if you read all the textbooks and everything, like experience matters a ton. And they have seen all types of rounds, punitive, non-punitive, pay to plays, like happen. They've seen all sorts, like they've seen it all, right? They've lived through it all. And I think the experience they bring to founders is tremendous. Yeah, they're very knowledgeable about the industry, but there's just things that like sometimes the insights they bring into conversations from their prior experiences are things that like are just impossible to learn, and you have to do it. So I think there's also a lot of value in the history of the organization and the tenure of very senior members of the team. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, what we really like to say is that the best way to figure out kind of the value that Monashees can bring to the table is by talking to founders themselves. Yeah, and we think they have really good things to say about us.
I love it. And
it was part of my due diligence process before coming into this role. And I have to say I was extremely impressed with what I heard.
Exciting. And so now I want to discuss some more investment focused questions. And this is a minefield every time I ask an investor this, because the other ones will get jealous, but obviously they won't watch this. Can you share one investment that you're particularly proud of and why?
Yeah. So I will say the caveat that since I joined, we haven't announced any investments that I have been a part of. So there's a few that will be coming out that I am excited about, very, very excited about. I think, yeah, one of the most exciting companies there. I think one company that I think is really interesting is Vamo, which used to be called Leoparda Electric, which is a swappable battery network for courier drivers in Brazil for motorcycles. So I think it's interesting because you have all the climate tech angle, right? Um, which is very important in the region, and you also have the important tailwinds of the gig economy in Latin America, and you actually have a model that is economically better for these people and can drive a lot of efficiency. So I think that one is one that is a little bit different, and also just extremely exciting.
I think it is too, and I don't mind the name change either. Do you have a specific sector that you're particularly interested in right now?
Yeah. So it's been interesting because Fabiola, who was my boss and the principal, the person who leads the office here in Mexico, she did her MBA at Stanford and she also did a master's in sustainability. So when she got to Monashees, she actually started working on a climate tech thesis. So my first week in Monashees, she was like, "Hey, look, this is what I'm working on. Do you want to help me out?" And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." Um, so I started looking a lot into climate tech, something I didn't really know a ton about. Um, and I'm extremely excited about things that can happen in climate tech in the region. I think it's truly fertile ground for climate tech here. Of course, it's a little bit tricky. Sometimes a lot of models are asset heavy, but I think it's also a region where you can almost look at other regions and see and predict with very good accuracy what's going to happen in Latam. You know, usually first things happen like regulation and innovation happens in Europe, then in the US, and then later it comes to Latam. Um, so I think there's very good ways to see what's going to come into Latam, you know. And I think here we have a ton of different resources, and then you also have like a lot of different environmental issues, right? Like air quality in a lot of the major Latin American cities is a big problem. And I think that governments here are going to have to start taking climate tech and the environment way more seriously going forward. So there's going to be a lot of very interesting catalysts in the years to come.
Yeah, we're talking air quality.
And
I was excited to go from Mexico City to New York, and New York had the worst air quality, so it was
yeah,
all part of the
okay,
game.
yeah,
But I'd like
yeah,
I'd like to ask, what is the best part of your job and why?
it's a lot of fun parts. But I'll give the generic answer, but I think it is truly the best. I think being able to get to know, like on a personal basis, what like the most intelligent people and driven people in the region are building, and the ideas in their heads is just an incredible experience. You know, I think just having conversations with entrepreneurs is always super interesting to see. I think at Monashees we also have like being at Monashees, I also have the luck of being a board observer in many roles. And we're lucky that many of our portfolio companies have amazing cap tables with amazing investors around the world. And being able to also listen to the perspective of those guys, how they're seeing the macro, how they're seeing the different markets play out, how they're seeing different industries, and the insights they bring to the companies is also something that is really enjoyable and a mini MBA in and of itself.
And can you tell a little bit more? So you said Monashees started in Sao Paulo. They've recently started to expand in Mexico City. Could you tell us a little bit more about the focus of this Mexico City office and what's happening there?
Yeah. So I would add that like Monashees has been investing in Latam since 2016, as I mentioned. And I think initially, like given we invested in Rappi and a lot of companies in Colombia, we were always very connected there. But I think what's been cool in Latin America is that every year you see things happening in different countries. So I think there was a moment where the team realized that doing everything from Brazil was going to be a little bit hard. So that's why the Mexico office is here, you know. I think Mexico is a really cool geography. I think I'm Colombian and I don't say this, I don't think with a major bias, but I would think that the ecosystem today is probably a little bit more advanced in Colombia than in Mexico, but Mexico is still like the most important market, right? So like a lot of companies that grow up in Colombia today eventually have to come to Mexico. So Mexico ends up being the best place to be as a VC. If you have to pick one place in Spanish speaking Latam, cover the entire region. And I think that's the main focus, you know, really making sure like really be like making Monashees a Latin American fund. Like we are, right, but like really polishing that, right? Like not only having the Brazilian team, but also having people that are Spanish speaking is really important, and really helps us be way more connected and plugged into what's happening in the Spanish speaking Latin world. What's cool is that everyone in Monashees is learning Spanish, and we're all learning Portuguese. So everyone in the organization, every single person, is the hope is that everyone's trilingual, and I think that has to do with our culture of being a Latin American fund. I think the other cool part of the Mexico City office is our proximity to the US. Um, we are very focused on LATAM, but we also invest in Latin American founders that are globally minded. So some Latin American founders abroad. Um, so from the Mexico City office, we we also keep like a very close relationship with those folks, with universities, um, and that's also really cool, to be able to have a little bit of the closer connection to the US. And of course, the folks in Brazil as well, but sometimes it's a little bit easier for us geographically to go to events in Miami, California, etc. Brazil is an amazing place, but it's just far from everything.
Mhm. It certainly is. And so you hinted a little bit about the process of kind of sourcing deal flow and making sure your coverage is as big as possible. How does Monashees source deal flow, and what does your due diligence process look like, and how do you evaluate potential investments?
Yeah, so I think deal flow, like as I mentioned, we are relentless about making sure that we have it. We have like the usual LinkedIn scraper. We have events at the major universities at least 2 times a year to make sure that we're connected with the right people. We're having calls with we actually did a project where we mapped the most important hubs of where entrepreneurs are coming from, and we are extremely intentional about making sure that we're talking to each of those different hubs, kind of on the daily, and that we're never that a lot of that we never have a lot of time without kind of touching base with one of those folks. And also having 92 active portfolio companies and I think over 120 investments is also really helpful. A lot of deal flow just comes from those connections we've built, and those true like deep connections we've built with the founders we've worked with in the past. Yeah, so I would say it's well built, but it's something that we are relentless about. And in terms of like due diligence, I think it's also very relationship driven. Of course, we do the usual research. You go to Google, but I think where you could really find value add is by being able to speak to people that have worked directly with the founders. We're very human driven here at Monashees. So founders is really important, and like our network allows us to really um, get to know who we're working with from all different angles, and also just like expert calls, industry experts. That's a big part of our diligence process. That also comes with the Rolodex connections and experience a lot of the partners I've had here. I think the rest is it's pretty generic. Of course, we build the model. We spend a lot of time with the team. Uh, sometimes, yeah, we try to give like angles, like different kind of angles or colors or flavors to calls. But the biggest excuse is for us to really be able to spend a lot of time with the team and vice versa. I think what we try to do in the process is also have a process where founders can learn a little bit about how we work, about the questions we ask, about the way we add value, about our value as a partner. So I think we're also very intentional about that. So yeah, like I won't dive into the details, but there's a point in the process where we intentionally connect like the founders with other founders in our portfolio, in relevant industries or sectors. Um, and yeah, and we have a process where we can do it with all the time, right? Which has been my experience for most deals since I joined, which when industry hasn't been that rushed, so to speak, from what I hear in 2021, it was crazy. Oh, the founders have an opportunity to meet a lot of people in the team. Um, so yeah, we also try to make it kind of both ways.
Okay. Okay, so finally, I have to ask Peter Thiel's famous contrarian question with uniquely Semilla.VC twist. What important truth about Latin America do very few people agree with you on?
Yeah, I figured you were going to ask this question based on previous interviews, so I gave it some thought. I have two answers. The first one, FX will be a massive tailwind for the region. It's really interesting because we have a lot of conversations with funds that are tiptoeing or like trying to see if they make their first investment in Latam, and they're like, it's really hard to get comfortable with valuations because of currency depreciation. I have to make that in. It's a big risk. I have to be very conservative on price, and I wouldn't be able to close any deals. Well, I think FX is actually going to be a massive tailwind, especially in the Mexican peso and the Brazilian real, especially in the short term. I'm a big macro guy, and I would say this is a high conviction call. And then the second one is that I think Latin America today has companies and entrepreneurs that are leading in their kind of field globally. I think initially we had X for Latam, and I think that's perfectly fine, perfectly valid. Like a lot of those businesses are solving really important pain points. But the other thing is that like today there are people creating like global innovations from Latam, and that will only continue to grow. And I think that's something that's incredibly exciting for the region.
Two great answers. First one, very Goldman, but I'll take it. Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Semilla.VC podcast today. I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you, Trip. Have a good one.
Thank you for watching this episode of Semilla.VC. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you view the podcast. Follow me on Twitter @GormanTrip. And be sure to check out our newsletter, Dealflow LA, which can be found by going to dealflow.la.